We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Beis Amud Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 72a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing kotzer l'shachas, which is one who harvests fodder, and the Gemara was discussing whether that's considered to be harvesting or not. Now, in our Mishnah, that results in a leniency if it's not considered to be harvesting. As our Mishnah says, kotzer l'shachas, if one harvests for fodder, umachil lebehema, in order to feed it to an animal, so then it's not considered to be harvesting, and therefore one is allowed to harvest it before the Omer. There's a machlokas in our Mishnah whether that applies only to young grain that has not yet developed 1/3. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. It only applies before 1/3 of its growth. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, even after 1/3 of its growth, still this leniency applies. Again, kotzer l'shachas umachil lebehema, that it's not considered to be harvesting, and therefore the harvesting can take place before the Omer. And on the previous summit, the Gemara brought Mishnayos in Peah, which indicate a stringency that can result from the fact that it's not considered to be katsira, it's not considered to be harvesting, and the stringency is, let's say one were to do this in the middle of a field, it could split the field in two if it's not considered to be regular harvesting, and then both sides of the field are going to be required in Peah. Peah will have to be separated from two fields instead of from one field. And so as we just said in the Mishnah on the previous daf, there's a machlokas tanoim, this kotzer l'shachas umachil lebehema, exactly when it's not considered to be katsira. Is it only again when it hasn't yet grown a third, or even if it's already grown a third? But on the previous summit, the Gemara brought another opinion, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara said on the previous Amud that Rabbi Meir would consider it not to be katsira even in a situation where this was done for human consumption. If it was done for human consumption as well, as long as it has not grown a third, Rabbi Meir will say that is not considered to be katsira. And the Gemara wanted to know who Rabbi Meir is following, because in our Mishnah it's clear that the purpose is for an animal. Rabbi Meir seems to extend it to a situation for a person. And the Gemara then brought Rabbi Akiva and said that Rabbi Meir essentially follows Rabbi Akiva. But then the Gemara said on the previous summit, Rabbi Akiva actually takes it even further than Rabbi Meir, because he applies it in his halacha even in a situation where it has grown a third, and a separate discussion not relevant so much to this specific Amud, but the Mefarshim, the commentaries discussed that really Rabbi Akiva seems to be operating with a different logic altogether. It doesn't necessarily seem to be operating with the logic that it's not considered to be katsira. That is a separate discussion, but regardless, the Gemara in the previous summit said that Rabbi Meir is going like Rabbi Akiva. Now it seems he's not going like Rabbi Akiva. And so the Gemara now continues and says, Savar la kavase bechada upalagale bechada. Actually, Rabbi Meir agrees with Rabbi Akiva in one respect, but argues with him in another respect. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Meir Savar la Rabbi Akiva bechada below hevi shlish. Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Akiva in one respect, in meaning to say in a case where it hasn't grown a third. There, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva agree, even if it's for human consumption. Again, Rabbi Meir will say it's not considered to be katsira. However, upalagale behevi shlish. Rabbi Meir would argue with Rabbi Akiva in the case of hevi shlish, in the case where it grew a third. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Kotzrin mipnei hanetios umipnei beis ha'evel umipnei beis ha'merish. Another few leniencies in the Mishnah. One is allowed to harvest, let's say there are young trees. Rashi gave a couple reasons for that. And also mipnei beis ha'evel, let's say you need space for a house of mourning. And mipnei beis ha'merish, let's say you need space for a beis medrash. In all of these cases, one can harvest before the Omer. And the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason for this? Why is this permitted, these leniencies? And the Gemara answers, Kitzir Chem Amar Achman. It says your harvest. V'lo Kitzir Mitzvah doesn't apply to a harvest that's a mitzvah, and for the house of mourning, for the beis medrash, it is a mitzvah. And Rashi explains, my time, what's the reason? We're going specifically on the case of mourning and the case of the beis medrash. That's where it's a mitzvah. The netia nafkalon kedel el. Now, in terms of the young saplings that we learned out earlier, mimakom shiata mevi ata kotzer, that from an area where you're not going to be bringing the omer, you are allowed to harvest. That's the reason for the leniency over there by the netios. Umi beis ha'ilan ein mevi an omer. Again, from the area of these trees, one doesn't bring the omer. Kidam rinam beperakala karbonos. That we're going to say later on. And lelishna the farishas lael mishum kelayim. Now there was another explanation that Rashi gave earlier in terms of netios, that it was really just an issue of kelayim. That's why one is allowed to harvest. So then mahadir afa netios. Then essentially it's a mitzvah. It's to prevent kelayim. And so the Gemara here would be going on that case of netios as well. And Rashi continues kitzirchem. Again, it says your harvest reishis kitzirchem liktzirchem tehezu reishis. Meaning for your harvest, that's not a mitzvah. The omer has to be the first. Nothing can be before it. V'lo liksir l'ikser mitzvah. It doesn't apply if the harvest is done for a mitzvah. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, even in a situation of leniency, the Mishnah said, v'lo yaseh karichos, one shouldn't tie the bundles, avol menichin sevasim, one should leave them untied. The Gemara says, my time, what's the reason for this? The kama de'efshar lo tarchin, and as much as possible, we're going to limit the amount of work. In other words, what needs to be done will be done, but don't go further than that, don't tie the bundles. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, the Mishnah said, mitzvah sa'omer lahavi min hakama, the mitzvah by the omer is to bring it from standing grain that hasn't yet been cut. One should cut it for the purpose of the omer. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the sages taught in a brayso. The pasuk says, v'im ta'akriv minchas bikurim, it says, if you bring the minchas bikurim, matam elomer, what does the pasuk mean by this? Lefisha mitzvah sa'omer lahavi min hakama, the idea is as follows. Really, the omer should be brought from the standing grain. Minayin shem lo motzim min hakama, now how do we know if one doesn't find standing grain? Yavi min ha'omer, he brings from the sheaves that have already been cut. Talmud lomar takriv, the pasuk says takriv, and that says even min ha'omrin. Davar acher, another explanation. Takriv, it says takriv, lefisha mitzvah lahavi min halach, really it should be from the moist grain. Uminayin shem lo motzim min halach, yavi min hayavish, how do we know if he doesn't find moist, he brings from the dry? Talmud lomar takriv, again the pasuk says takriv. Davar acher, another explanation. Takriv, it says takriv, lefisha mitzvaso liksor balayla, really the mitzvah is to cut the omer at night. Minayin shem niksor bayom kasher, from where do we know that if he cuts the grain, the barley during the daytime, it's kosher? V'doches ha-Shabbos, and also how do we know that it is doches Shabbos? Talmud lomar, the pasuk says takriv, it says takriv. And the idea is as follows, takriv kolshu, bring anything, takriv mikol makom, bring in any place, takriv afilu b'Shabbos, bring even on Shabbos, takriv afilu b'tumah, and bring even in tumah. That's what we learn from this pasuk. And Rashi explains, ma Talmud lomar, what is the pasuk saying? Again, the Brisa said, it says, v'im takriv minchas bikurim, ma Talmud lomar, v'aksib b'sefer dekra. The question is as follows. It says at the end of the pasuk, takriv minchas bikurecha. It says takriv minchas bikurecha. Essentially, the pasuk seems to be repeating itself. We'll take a look at the full pasuk. V'im takriv minchas bikurim la'Hashem aviv koloi bo'esh geres karmel takriv eis minchas bikurecha. And so that's the question of the Gemara. Min hakama should be standing grain dechsiv, because it's written in the pasuk that way. Chermesh bakama. And min halach dechsiv karmel. We learn from the word karmel that it should be something that's soft, that's moist. And belayla and night, kedamran b'reish pirkin, like we say in the beginning of our perek, iata motzi tamimos. It's not going to be a complete svira sa'omer elam kein ata maschel mi bo'erev, unless you start from the evening. That's talking about starting from the evening of the 16th. And Rashi continues, the Brisa then said takriv means kol shehu, that specifically refers to af min ha'omrim, even from the sheaves, even if it was already cut. And then it said takriv mi kol makom, specifically that means af min ha'rochok mi Yerushalayim. It means from any place, even a place that's far away from Yerushalayim. And then again, the Gemara said, the Brisa said even on Shabbos and even in Tumah. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, even though it should be harvested at night, niksar biyom kosher. If it's harvested during the day, it is still kosher. The Gemara asks, Vatanan, but we learned in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Meseches Megillah, Kol halayla kosher l'ktsira sa'omer u'lahaktir chalovim ve'ivarim. All night it's kosher for the harvesting of the omer and for the burning of the fats and the limbs on the mizbeach. Zeh haklal, this is the rule. Davar shemitzvasu kol hayom kosher kol hayom. Something that the mitzvah is to do it all day, it's supposed to be done, it's kosher all day. Davar shemitzvasu b'layla, and something that the mitzvah is to do it at night, kosher kol halayla, it's kosher to do all night. The point is, if it's during the day, it's the whole day. If it's during the night, it is the entire night. But the point over here, says the Gemara, is katani laila dumya diyom. Shouldn't we be learning over here night similar to day? Ma diyom b'layla lo. Just like things that are supposed to be done during the day, they should not be done at night. After laila, isn't this Mishnah saying something that's supposed to be at night? Biyom nami lo. It should not be done during the day, and it is not kosher during the day. And again, it's talking in this Mishnah about ketziras omer. It sounds like it's not kosher in the day. Our Mishnah says that if it's done in the day, even though that's not preferred, but it is still kosher. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rabba says, lo kash, it's not difficult. Ha Rebbe, v'ha Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon. One Mishnah is following the opinion of Rebbe, the other is following the opinion of Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, hayomer u'makriv minchas ha'omer, one is standing and offering the minchas ha'omer, v'nitmis, it becomes tamei. Im yesh acheres, if there's something else to bring, omer lo have acheres tachteh, then he should say to him, bring another one, even though it could be brought betumah, as we just said, but it's preferred, it's better not to be brought betumah. V'im la, but if not, if there's nothing else available, omer lo, we say to him, have pikeach, v'shasuk, be wise and be silent about it, it can be brought in tumah. Divrei Rebbe, these are the words of Rebbe. Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon Shimon Omer, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says, Bein kach uvein kach, in all situations, Omer lo, he says to him, have pikeach, v'shasuk, you should be wise, be silent. And Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says, why? Why should one be silent? Shekol ha'omer shenixar, shelo k'mitzvah, so anytime the Omer is harvested, not in accordance with the mitzvah, pasul, it is going to be pasul. Now, in this case over here, we're talking about during the day, it is the day of the 16th. In other words, something was harvested the night before. Now it's the day of the 16th and it becomes tamei. Rebbe says, if you can go find something else to harvest something else. That shows that Rebbe says during the day is still kosher. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says, no, that's called nixar shelo k'mitzvah, so that's called harvested not in accordance with the mitzvah. It's supposed to be at night, and therefore, according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, in the day is actually going to be pasul, and so therefore, our Mishnah will follow Rebbe that in the daytime it's kosher. The Mishnah Meseches Megillah will follow Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon that in the daytime it is pasul. And Rashi explains, "Ulahaktir chalavim, to burn the fats, masha mesachel min hamizbeach, machzir kol halayla." Rashi here learns a unique understanding of this. The simple understanding is we're just talking about burning the fats and the limbs of karbanos overnight. Rashi says we're talking about a situation where it gets ejected from the mizbeach, it can be returned the entire night. The commentaries discuss why Rashi says that over here. Shemitzvaso kol hayom, if the mitzvah is during the day, it's all day. It could go in shchitus, rikastam, like slaughtering, throwing the blood. Dichsib beyom tzavosas b'nei Israel, it says it's the day, it's the whole day. Ma diyom b'layla lo, and the Gemara said, well, that which is during the day, so it cannot be at night. And the idea is, to kachim shashchotim b'layla psulin, if you have kachim, karbanos, that are slaughtered at night, that's a disqualification. The Amar b'Meseches Nida, we say that in Meseches Nida, zosi ha'ola harelu mutin, prat likeshashachta b'layla psula, it says explicitly over there, it's excluding, it's considered pasul when it's slaughtered at night, but perak yotzei dofen and perak yotzei dofen. And Rashi continues, the opinion of Rebbe, if there's some other kind of barley, even if it's attached to the ground, so we bring that, we harvest it, we grind it biyom during the day. We don't want people to say that even if it was, let's say, an offering that was an individual's offering, a mincha that's tamei is okay. In this particular situation, since it's a communal offering, it would have been okay, but we don't want people to draw the wrong conclusion. And Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says, no, shenixar shelo k'mitzvah so pasul. If it was harvested not in accordance with the mitzvah, it's disqualified. U'mitzvah's kitzira b'layla, and the mitzvah is to really harvest it at night, v'lo b'yom, and not during the day. Hilka chadatani la'el nixar b'yom kosher. Therefore, that which we learned earlier, that if it's harvested during the day, it's kosher. Rebbe, that's going to follow Rebbe. V'hadatanya pasul, and the one that says pasul, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, that's following Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba bar bar Chana says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, Beshitas Rabbi Akiva, Rabbo shel Aviv Amr. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, he follows the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva was the Rebbe of his father. Means to say Rabbi Akiva was the Rebbe of Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Elazar, of course, the son of Rabbi Shimon, so he's following the Rebbe of his father. And where do we see that? T'tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah. Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva, there's a general rule that Rabbi Akiva says, Kol malacha she'efshar lo la'asos ha'erev Shabbos, any malacha that one could do on Erev Shabbos, eino doches ha-Shabbos, that does not push off Shabbos. In other words, if it's possible to do it before Shabbos, then we don't say that it pushes off Shabbos, that it can be done on Shabbos. So that is one idea that Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon is following. And furthermore, v'savar lak Rabbi Yishmael, he also holds like Rabbi Yishmael, damar ktsiras ha-omer mitzvah. Rabbi Yishmael says that the harvesting of the omer is considered to be a mitzvah. The Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, Rabbi Yishmael omer, Rabbi Yishmael says, machorish reshus, just like the plowing that we're talking about is a reshus, is something that's voluntary. Af kitzir reshus sotu, when we talk about harvesting, it's talking about voluntary harvesting. And the key line over here in Rabbi Yishmael, yotza kitzir ha'omer, that excludes the harvest of the omer, shehi mitzvah, that it is a mitzvah. In other words, Rabbi Yishmael is saying clearly over here that the harvesting of the omer is a mitzvah. And the Gemara now continues and explains that if we combine these two ideas, if we combine the idea of Rabbi Akiva, that something that can be done before Shabbos is not Docha Shabbos, and the idea of Rabbi Yishmael, that the harvesting of the Omer is a mitzvah, so now we conclude as follows. If it should enter your mind that Nixar Shalo Mitzvah so kosher, if it should enter your mind not like Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, that let's say it's harvested not in accordance with the mitzvah, it's still kosher, let's say it's harvested during the day, for example, it is kosher, so then we would have a question, question. Amai dochi Shabbos. Why is it that the harvesting of the Omer is docha Shabbos? We know that the harvesting of the Omer is docha Shabbos. It can be done on Shabbos. Now, if it is true that nixar shalokim mitzvah is kosher, why should it be docha Shabbos? We would have a simple solution. Nixare may erev Shabbos. We really should just harvest it from before Shabbos, because nixar shalokim mitzvah, so it doesn't have to be harvested at the exact right time. So let's harvest it before Shabbos. Elami dedachi Shabbos, and so rather from the fact that it pushes off Shabbos, shema minon nixar shalokim mitzvah so puzzle, we see that nixar shalokim mitzvah so must be puzzle. In other words, what the Gemara is saying is as follows. Rabbi Yishmael says kitzir ha'omer is a mitzvah, and what Rabbi Yishmael is saying when he says kitzir ha'omer is a mitzvah, he's saying that it is a mitzvah and therefore it's docha Shabbos. Now, if you take that in combination with the idea that a malacha that is able to be done before Shabbos is not docha Shabbos, so why should it be docha Shabbos? It must be that if it's done not at the proper time, it is actually not kosher in such a situation, and that's why, since the Ketzir HaOmer is a mitzvah, and since it is impossible to do it at any other time, it needs to be done on that particular night, the night of the 16th, that's why it is docha Shabbos. And Rashi explains, Rabbo Shalaviv, again, this is the Rebbe of his father, Rabbi Shimon Talmido Shal Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon was one of the students of Rabbi Akiva. Kedam Rabbi Yevamos, like it says in Yevamos, Beparakabal Yevemto, and Parakabal Yevemto, Vayaolim Shamim Ad Sheba Rabbi Akiva. Again, the world was desolate until Rabbi Akiva came, and he accumulated some Talmidim. Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva. Now, Rabbi Akiva has a rule, B'mila, this is by Bris Mila in Mesechet Shabbos. B'mila Kamayri, B'Perak Rabbi Eliezer Demila, this is in Perak Rabbi Eliezer Demila, in Mesechet Shabbos. Again, the general rule, it's not docha Shabbos. Something is not docha Shabbos if it could be done before Shabbos. V'savar lo Rebbe Elazar Rabbi Yishmael. Now also, Rebbe Elazar holds like Rabbi Yishmael, Da'amar Ketzir HaOmer mitzvah. He says the harvest of the Omer is a mitzvah. V'docha Shabbos. The point of Rabbi Yishmael was to say it's a mitzvah and it's docha Shabbos. And so again, Rebbe Elazar holds the Ketziras HaOmer is docha Shabbos, and therefore it must be that it can only be done at the proper time and no other time, as the Gemara continued and said, V'sakadaitach nixar shalokim mitzvah so kosher. If it should enter your mind that if it's harvested at the wrong time, which is shalokim mitzvah, so it's still kosher, amai docha Shabbos. Why would it be docha Shabbos? Hasvir lam Rabbi Akiva. We hold like Rabbi Akiva. The chol shev shelasos erev Shabbos ain't a docha Shabbos. That if it could be done before Shabbos, it's not docha Shabbos. And so that's the idea. Elami the docha Shabbos. Rather, we know from the fact that it is docha Shabbos. So shema mi know we see from there. Rabbi Shimon says we see from there nixar shalokim mitzvah so pasul, that if it's harvested not in accordance with the mitzvah at the wrong time, it is disqualified. Umitzvah lo have ela b'matzah yomtiv, and therefore the mitzvah is only on matzah yomtiv, the night of the 16th. V'gabe laila nami mitzvah so b'laila v'lo b'yom, and as far as night also, the mitzvah specifically at night and not during the day. But the Gemara continues and asks, but Rebbe who argues in Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon, again, Rebbe says that if it is done during the day, if it's done not at the proper time, it's kosher. Lav Talmidei Rebbe Shimon, who is he not a student of Rebbe Shimon? Rashi explains, Rebbe Lav Talmidei Rebbe Shimon, who bit me, this is a question. V'amai lo shmiya lei mi Rebbe Shimon, the savar lok Rebbe Akiva, the chol she'ef shemeir Shabbos, lo dachis Shabbos. Really, Rebbe should be led to the same conclusion. Because again, Rebbe is also a student of Rebbe Shimon, who is a student of Rebbe Akiva, and therefore, if it can be done before Shabbos, it shouldn't be docha Shabbos. And we're assuming that Rebbe also agrees that the Ksiras HaOmer is docha Shabbos. And so therefore, it really doesn't make sense. How can Rebbe say, on the one hand, that it can be done not at night, it can be done at the improper time and it's still kosher, but on the other hand say that it is still docha Shabbos if in fact he holds something is only docha Shabbos if it is not able to be done before Shabbos. And the Gemara continues and shows that Rebbe is a student of Rebbe Shimon. V'atanya, we learned in a brayso, Amar Rebbe said, Kishayinu l'meid in Torah, Eitzel Rebbe Shimon b'Tekoa, when we were learning Torah by Rebbe Shimon in Tekoa, Hayinu malin lo shemen va'aluntis mechotzer l'gag, u'megag l'karfeif, u'mekarfeif l'karfeif, we would bring him the shemen, which is the oil, the aluntis is like a towel, and we would bring it in a way that we didn't violate Shabbos carrying. We brought it from a courtyard to the roof, from the roof to the enclosure, from the enclosure l'karfeif acher to another enclosure, ad shanu magiyin l'mayin, until we got to the spring, sha'anu rochtzen bo, that we were bathing there. And the point of bringing this is just to show that Rebbe, he holds like Rebbe Shimon, and therefore, again, if Rebbe holds like Rebbe Shimon, he should hold like Rebbe Akiva, that something is not docha Shabbos if it could be done at another time. And yet again, the Ketziras Omer is docha Shabbos, but Rebbe says it could be done at another time. And so the Gemara continues and answers to this, Savar Laki Idach to Rebbe Shimon, he holds like a different teaching of Rebbe Shimon. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, Rebbe Shimon says, Borei kama chaviva mitzvah v'shaita, come and see how beloved a mitzvah is when done in its proper time. Because really the burning of the fats and the limbs is kosher the entire night. But he didn't wait for them until it became dark. Rashi explains, Hayinu mal and lo, again we would bring up to him, it says when we were learning Torah by Rabbi Shimon, we would bring up the oil and the aluntis for Rabbi Shimon lataime. This is just Rabbi Shimon according to his opinion. Diyamar be'erev, and he says in erev and echad gagos v'chatzeiros, with regards to roofs and courtyards, rishus achas lahen, lakelim sheshav subesoch, and they're all considered one rishus. Aluntis is beged lehistapik bo, it is a garment to dry with, that's talking essentially about a towel. Savar la ki'iduch to Rabbi Shimon, he holds like the other teaching of Rabbi Shimon. Diyamar chaviva mitzvah v'shaita, Rabbi Shimon holds that in the right time, it's best to do a mitzvah. Hilkach, therefore, afal gav diksherim erev Shabbos, even though technically speaking, the harvesting of the Omer is kosher erev Shabbos before Shabbos, avdi lo b'shaita, still it's better, says Rebbe, to do it in the right time, v'dachya Shabbos, meaning do it the night of the 16th and have it bidocha Shabbos, even though again technically it really could have been done at a different time, but we say that it's best to do it at the optimal time. Now, the question then is, what about by bris milah? V'gabe milah diyamar kol malacha shefshel la'asos erev Shabbos ain't a docha Shabbos. Now, by milah, when we say if it could be done before Shabbos, it's not docha Shabbos, that's kegon havos izem. Well, that's only, for example, like bringing the knife. De'ein lo zman kavod. There is no set time to do that anyway, so that's not going to be docha Shabbos. But something that has a preferred time, that is docha Shabbos. And Rashi continues again, where do we see according to Rabbi Shimon that chaviva mitzvah v'shaita, that's by the evarim upedarim ksherin kol halayla, really the limbs and the fats, they can be burned the entire night. However, v'lo haya mamtin, but he wouldn't wait. What that means is, le'evari tamidinu musafin, let's say you have limbs of a tamid and a musaf, the Shabbos of Shabbos, and so you want to burn those, but you really technically could wait till Motzei Shabbos. But he didn't wait ad shetechshach, he didn't wait until it became dark. They wanted to do it right away. That's the idea of chaviva mitzvah v'shaita. Alma dachin on Shabbos, we see that we push off Shabbos, mishum chaviva mitzvah v'shaita, because the mitzvah is beloved in its time, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Beis Amid Beis.